All right, we're back on the bottom line. Today we've got Keith Jensen. We're going to talk about marketing metrics, tracking performance through the funnel, maybe hit a little bit of HIPAA challenges. But let's let our guests quickly say hi. Keith, do you mind
Keith
just
in the
giving us a quick
house.
intro? Yeah, tell us about yourself.
Hey, uh, this is the worst part. Let's skip through this. How about we just say I've been doing marketing for 20 years and worked with a lot of companies, so excited to talk about this stuff.
Awesome. Sounds like you
Beautiful.
know what you're doing then. Cool. Well, let's talk specifically for healthcare companies, right? Because that's why we're here. Um, Obviously, marketing, capturing the marketing attribution, tracking that through the funnel, that's why we're here today. So, can you kind of just give us a primer on how are you tracking marketing attribution, generally speaking?
Sure. So I'd say what I've mostly seen in the past is that marketers are tracking it through conversion data, forms, calls, and then ultimately saying, hey, we spent this amount of money, we got this amount of calls. And they have usually there's some kind of metric in there that says, or formula that says, hey, if the call lasted more than 3 minutes, probably a patient. We'll consider 80% of those converted. If it lasted between two and whatever three, then it's 60%. That's one way that's been done. Um, there are more complex ways which I prefer, which would be actually if let's say you have a call tracking platform similar to a line. You've got the phone number. You do dynamic number insertion on your website. Someone calls. The call tracking platform knows that it came from search engine marketing or organic based on the UTM parameter. Then you've got a phone number. They called in through a phone number, or if they filled out a form, they gave a phone number. Right. So now you have that piece of data. If they maybe filled an online form, you potentially have an email address. Uh, then, ideally, within a HIPAA compliant platform, you would match up those phone numbers and email addresses to the actual data from your EHR, EMR, point of sale system, whatever you're calling it, right? The data, the system that your clinics or locations are actually using to collect patient information. Ideally, what I typically like to do is you can just have summary level data come out of your EHR. Typically, it's what I do is one row per patient. So you got like a patient ID, de-identified, nothing that could identify the patient. Typically, an encrypted phone number. Um, Sometimes you'll get 4 or 5 phone numbers. You have a cell phone, a home phone, whatever they're collecting at the location. And then you run the matching to say, hey, we got this phone call from search engine marketing. Did it show up? How many times did they come in? What services did they get? And then you apply an actual revenue. In some cases, it might be a reimbursement model. We expect that on average, we'd be reimbursed $200 for a visit like this. So you apply some kind of revenue-based calculations on there, and then you tie that all back to the ads. And a lot of times you can, if you're tracking through like a line, and I think others, the call rails and the call tracking metrics might have this capability too. But if you're capturing a UTM parameter, you're typically capturing the actual ad campaign that you served. So when you do it this way, you can actually tie back how much revenue did we get from this specific ad campaign and how much money did we spend on it? And what's our CAC? What's our CAC to LTV, right? Ultimately, what you're trying to figure out with healthcare is how many times does somebody have to come back in order for you to be net positive or profitable on your ad spend? Because in a lot of cases, you might spend $300-400 to get somebody to show up at your door, right? To come in for a visit, and your reimbursement might only be $200. And by the time you pay the provider, you might be netting $50, right? So how many times you have to get that person to come in order for that cost to be positive? And it might be 3 months. You might find out that the lifetime value of that patient is only $150, in which case this isn't worth it to do these ads. So that's what I mean when I think about the through the funnel metrics.
Yeah.
One of the things I just heard you say, let me back up. Most of the practices that I talk to want to have everything you just described in one system. Well, why isn't there a platform that just does all this and connects it? And so the way you just described it was very simple because it's ultimately straightforward. But there's a couple of different platforms that play there, and you're also pulling data out, de-anonymizing it in certain situations, so there's no PHI in there. But how would you do? I mean, it sounds like you just have to have multiple systems that you're using, and there's not one platform that's going to do all this, right?
There's not one platform, but it doesn't have to be as many as you think to do what we just described. So you're always going to have a whole bunch of platforms. You might have a hot jar on your site that's looking at CRO, and then you might have a tag for something else that's looking at meta information, whatever that is. But for this really, if you're talking about, like, let's say Google Ads, which is a large amount of spend typically with healthcare organizations, really what you need is you already have Google Ads. You need, and a lot of people, there's a whole thing going on now with the GA4 Google Analytics being non-HIPAA compliant. People are switching to other platforms where they can sign a BAA, but you've got one of those. You've got your GA4. If your legal team isn't really, caring too much about the concerns there, or you've got your, mixed panel or whatever else that you have your BAA, but you have some kind of pixel that is tracking. The thing is, you really don't need that as much as you would think. What you really need is the tracking, the pixel on your site from the call tracking system that's going to swap the phone numbers, maybe ideally have forms embedded on your site, and potentially an API if you have an online booking tool that sends all that data into your call tracking platform. So now you've got your call tracking platform that knows these are the people that called or filled out a form. What I do like about Line is that the AI does go through and says, hey, these were booked. So the nice thing there is that, like, you can believe that a majority of those, I mean, there might be an error rate, or margin of error there, but it's low.
No way,
So you
Keith.
can say, okay, at least there's got to be some. So I don't believe it. So you go, okay,
Right.
these booked, but okay, so we got one platform there. Then you've got your EHR. You already have that, so that's not a new platform. That's your source of truth for who came in and how many times they came in. There's definitely a report you're going to have to build there that you're going to have to export or have an API in to pull that data out. The third platform is probably the most important one to do the actual math. I like there's a platform out there called Corral Data. And what I like about them is they have integrations with a lot of these systems already. Some EHRs, if they don't, they can build it. And a lot of times your EHR, they'll actually give you a Snowflake or other Azure database that they're just like every day dumping into, which is where they're running the reports. A lot of these EHRs, most people in healthcare know they're pretty antiquated, and they're not a product-led organization typically, so they're not coming out with new features all the time. So you need a report or a table that is summarizing the patient data, but that should not be too difficult. Then you can pull in the phone numbers and that called from Line or from CallRail or whatever you're using. Pull that data in. That's going to tell you the ad campaign that they called from, or that they came in from, the channel, direct, organic, referral, etc. Then you've got your EHR data that comes in. Corral does the matching and can apply all the revenue. What I've done a lot of times is I'll connect Corral to a Google Sheet where we have variable things where I can just manually go, a reimbursement change. So if a location is in South Carolina, change reimbursement for this care type to this. And it just updates in Corral. So the math can be dynamic. It doesn't have to be hard coded. You could build that in the variables of the math into a Google Sheet that connects in. Corral can do all the math and show you all of the data to say, yeah, this is what your CAC is, what your LTV is. And then the last thing you really need is Google Ads, which feeds directly again into Corral. And the line data that told you this phone number called from this campaign, that once that's in Corral, now Corral can match that campaign data up to the spend that came from Google Ads. So now you think about, you do have one system that has spend data from Google Ads, cost per click, all the good stuff Google Ads needs to know. Then it has how many people called from them, right? What was the conversion rate on them? And in Line's case, how many booked? And then you've got your EHR data matching up to say, how many showed up and how many times did they come back? And what was the reimbursement rate for those types of visits? And pull all that together, and now you have your CAC to LTV. And that is what truly, I think, is what a good marketer would want to make the decisions that they need to make about what's working, what isn't.
Makes a ton of sense. And if somebody is not doing that now, which most people are not, and they were gonna start doing it, it'll depend on their specialty and their practice. But um, you know, I ge- what I'm thinking about is lifetime value, right? So how long do you have to sort of track this to where you really understand enough to start optimizing the campaigns? Again, it'll be dependent on the nature of the services provided, but how would you help someone think about that if they were just getting started and they weren't sure maybe how many visits somebody has for their services?
Got it. So, well, tough to the end of that question made me think that you were saying if you don't know, if you don't have the EHR data to know how many times people are coming back, that's
I guess
difficult.
they would know because they've gotten so forget that part.
So let's say so now let's just say they know they have all this data that we just
Yeah, yeah.
described, right? What you're probably going to find out if you just start measuring today, what you're going to find out probably is that, well, we spent, making it up, $20,000 on Google Ads this month. We got X amount of bookings, and that only brought in $5,000 of revenue.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Like, don't panic, right? Most things don't bring back the revenue with a profit immediately. With healthcare services, especially, people are typically coming back. It's a little bit harder when you have annual based services. You've got
Hmm.
gastroenterologist, or you've got even dental is difficult, right? Because like people don't, people come. It's supposed to be every 6 months, and not everyone does that. Um, Meanwhile, you try to leave a dental practice without booking your next visit, and they basically tackle you, right? They're really good at the forward booking component of things, probably the best in all the healthcare verticals. But yeah, ultimately you have to figure out, you have to just let the calculation run to see how long is it going to take. Is it going to be 2, 3, 4 months before those that $5,000 that you originally brought in makes it over $20,000? And it should, right? If you are bringing patients in, no matter what the number is that you're bringing them in, the cost per booking, if they come back enough, eventually it'll get there. So the beautiful thing about this type of build, once it's built, is that it updates automatically. So the longer you get from the day you started tracking, that number just keeps racking up because people come back more and more times, ideally. And
Hmm.
eventually you can see it might be 2 months or it might be 9 months, but at some point you'll see how long it takes you to recoup that money. If you get to the 4 or 5 month mark and the first month is still below, you might start getting worried for sure. Um, but I think it all just depends, like you said, on whether this is a cash-based business
Yeah.
or insurance and reimbursement, which also could be variable based on the state. Which again, you can plug all into the Google sheet and just modify that there.
Yeah, yeah. I think anybody who's starting like this step one, in addition to everything Keith says, just like also just look at your historical data and your EHR of the average number of visits per patient that you've already had, regardless of where they came from, as a starting place, and just know that. And then
Yeah.
you have at least a point of reference to understand a time frame you should be expecting to some extent of when you're going to get a return on the marketing dollars. Um, Good stuff, man. Simple stuff. What else you want to talk about?
Wait, can we talk about
What?
HIPAA quickly? Because I know
Sure.
that's kind of obviously the big hurdle where it changes some of the things we're doing in marketing. How does that sort of impact what you're doing versus other industries, or especially like pixel tracking, things like Facebook, which rely
Yeah.
on pixel tracking to improve what their algorithms do? How do you get around all of that?
Well, look, I'll repeat what people have told me because I haven't done the research to see if this is a true statement or not, right? But what I have been told is that there are, lawyers trolling, looking at websites, going, "Ooh, this is a healthcare site. They've got Google Analytics on there. I'm going to include them in a class action lawsuit because we know that Google Analytics will not sign a BAA. Google will not sign a BAA." And essentially, what they're saying, or positing, and who knows if this is accurate or not. I'm not a lawyer, but what they're saying is that by allowing Google to have their pixel on your site and you having no agreement in place with Google as to what they can do with the information that they capture, even though you're not letting them capture things like name, or let's say that someone fills out a form and it's like name, email, and you're not letting Google have those, still Google has that person's IP address. And that IP address, they know through, virtually every other site in the world having Google Analytics on it. They know where they've been. They know a lot about that person, right? So by you basically allowing Google to know that this IP address hit your healthcare services page and went to a page about knee replacements,
Right.
well, you kind of violated HIPAA, is what they're saying, by allowing Google to be able to connect those dots. Now, who's to say what Google can do with that information? They can go sell that information to a pharmaceutical company that wants to advertise to people with knee pain, right? So that is where the problem comes in. And it really is up to each marketer and legal team to decide how risky they believe, or how at risk they believe they are. If you believe you're at risk, then there are platforms out there. I think Amplitude's one, Mixpanel, Heap.io. They'll all sign a BAA with you, a business associates agreement, essentially saying that we won't do anything with your data that you don't want us to. You decide where your data gets sent. So that's one component of the pixel tracking. Going back to what we were talking about in terms of the through the funnel, I think it all gets down to, again, the level of comfort your legal team will have with the systems you're using. You're going to have BAAs as a healthcare organization with virtually every system that touches your data. So, a line or any other call tracking, you're going to have a BAA in place with. A Corral data, where you bring everything, you'll have a BAA in place with. And then the majority of those companies will also be HIPAA compliant, which is kind of a self-certification, but it's saying, hey, we're secure enough that we feel good here. We're not going to, we're not at any risk for violating HIPAA or breaches. So that's essentially the ways. And now the level of information that you send into these platforms, like for instance, a Corral data, you may decide, well, I don't want them to have name, phone number, email, right? Really all they need is the phone number. So what you can do is, out of your EHR, you run a script that encrypts the phone number. That basically runs it through this huge algorithm, right? That takes all these numbers and multiplies them and does all this stuff. And there's a key to that algorithm to decode it to get it back to a phone number. You send that data into Corral, and potentially you get the same, let's say, encryption happening from your call tracking. You don't even have to necessarily decrypt it to get phone number. You can match up the encrypted numbers and say, okay, these match, so now we know. So there are definitely ways to not pass HIPAA related data in to platforms and still be able to do this kind of calculations. It just takes a little extra work.
Right on.
It's interesting that it's been like you said, it's because of the lawsuits that are going on. But I mean, this wasn't a thing until 3-4 months ago, right? And some big groups are getting legal trouble, and then everybody's talking about it. So
it's like that too good to be true thing, right? Everyone's
yeah,
always like, man, Google's great. They're giving us this pixel that tells us all these cool things. And Google's like, well, yeah,
yeah. Good luck.
because I'm monetizing this on the back end, with everyone else who wants to advertise to the people who came to your site.
Totally.
So it's not exactly as simple as that, but it all boils down to, if they're interpreting IP address as part of PHI or PII, then you are basically giving away PHI by allowing a Google Pixel on there, and that is a more recent school of thought. So again, I'm not going to say that it's a true statement, because again, I haven't seen any of these lawsuits, but I have been told that they exist. So it ultimately comes down to how risky or how at risk you believe your organization is.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, key takeaway from today is, if you're just tracking the initial sale, you're missing out on the actual performance. Lifetime value, get that data.
Yeah, and heck, most people are just tracking calls or clicks, man. You got to go deeper than that, no doubt.
Yeah. I think this
easier to make business decisions when you go deeper, for sure.
No doubt.